in data science at NIH, but I want you to get the sense that this is not just a limited number of small people in a small office. This is really a trans-NIH activity that involves over 30 working groups across NIH, 5 people or more per working group. So it's a lot of work that I'm going to show you. And what I'm going to show you is basically what the vision is and what we're doing to enact that vision. So the vision that we have for data science at NIH is really a vision about making data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And Vivian did such a lovely job to really lay that out for you. We're also looking to make our data systems integrated, exactly as Vivian has said, and to apply modern technologies and tools to really enhance data science at NIH. It's always good to know when you start a journey, where are you going to end up? And I'm going to show you a few endpoints for the next 3 to 5 years that I think are feasible and can happen. But these are no means an exhaustive list, and you should know that we are developing sort of what's called a basic needs requirement document, which elaborates a number of use cases and all of the data and tools and needs and capabilities that we need to enact in order to make this happen. So the first one is really about taking data that we have in different high-value data sets across NIH. For example, you might be interested in the Freeman Heart study. And you might also be interested in aging data. And what you really want to know is what are the correlative effects of vascular health. Okay. I have this on. Do you want me to use that one?
No, both, because when you turn this way, it's low in the back.
Oh, sorry. Okay. I can just use that one if it's easier. Okay. Sorry, I don't want to. So what are the effects of cardiovascular health with aging and dementia? In order to action that, we really need to make connections between the data resources at Heart, Lung, and Blood and the data resources in the Aging Institute. And in order to do that, we need to connect our data resources, just as Vivian said. This is an example from my own field. With technology today that is determining high-resolution structures of complexes, such as cryo-EM, we're able to get high-resolution data about proteins such as membrane proteins. What if you were able to connect that data with spectroscopic data or energetic data of binding of chromophores so that you could understand those membrane proteins both as native and wild type across different pHs and with different ligands binding? That data, those spectroscopic data, those energetic data, they don't have a repository that they live in. Those are data that underlies figures and tables and publications. And for the most part, most researchers do not have the ability to get that data unless they do an elaborate email back and forth with different PIs. And so to have that data at your fingertips, it just allows you a much bigger picture in order to develop your research questions. What if you could do that? We can do that, but in order to do that, we have to make sure that the data in figures and tables in publications is findable and accessible to all researchers. And so that's what I'm going to tell you about. This is a field that's really near and dear to my heart. It's really about integrating modern technology and sensors with modern tools in artificial intelligence or deep learning with computational tools on the chip on those sensors. And what this allows us to do is to really monitor patients, for example, in clinics in real time. Sometimes patients in clinics, their prognosis changes rapidly in the course of a day. And having that data and being able to compute on it in real time would make a significant progress towards solving problems in sepsis. Or, for example, remote sensors can deliver vaccines, or we just recently heard in Baltimore delivering different organs for transplant. Data and artificial intelligence coupled with imaging data will allow us to really have a good ability to resolve tumors or other issues that you would find in imaging data. So in order to leverage these types of capabilities, we need to leverage algorithms and artificial intelligence and computation, what's called edge computing, which is computation on chips that commute with the cloud. What if we were able to link our electronic healthcare records with basic biological data about pathways, gene expression, protein modifications, and data about you in the All of Us program that's contextually aware of where you are in your environment, we would be able to provide a much richer data set for researchers in order to ask basic questions about you and your environment and your biological processes. In order to do this, we really have to think very carefully about data integration, because this requires integrating standards in fire and health IT with standards in basic biology, with standards in environmental studies. So this is the promise of the vision for data science at NIH. And now I'm going to tell you, along that pathway, what are some of the milestones that we're reaching in order to accomplish that vision. So this is the actual strategic plan, and I'm showing it to you in 5 cylinders of excellence: data infrastructure, modernizing our data ecosystem, data management, analytics and tools, workforce development, and stewardship and sustainability of policies. But what I want you to not think about is these 5 pillars of excellence, but rather an integrated, collaborative system where we're working together to develop fair data and data infrastructures. We're working together to connect our data ecosystems. We're engaging a broader community across federal agencies and industry partners, and we're enhancing our biomedical workforce, and we're developing sustainable data policies. So I'm going to tell you about what we're doing in those 5 areas, but I want you to be left with the image that this is not 5 separate activities, but it's an integrated activity coordinated through the Office of Data Science Strategy. So let me tell you a little bit about the office. We are an office that sits here within Poughkeepsie. We provide leadership and coordination on the strategic plan in collaboration with all of the institutes and centers. We help develop and implement this plan for a modernized and integrated biomedical data ecosystem. We're developing programs for diverse and talented data science workforce. We coordinate with different trans-NIH governance committees, in particular with the Scientific Data Council, and in coordination with the Chief Information Officer, Andrea Norris. We're building strategic partnerships to develop and disseminate advanced technologies and methods. So that's the office. It's a small office of just a few people, but there's really a lot of people working in this area across NIH, including Vivian. So let me tell you about the progress we've made in these 5 areas, starting with fair data and data infrastructure. And as Vivian said, FAIR is really making sure that we tag data. If you remember Mutual of Omaha, where you tag the elephant or the lion, it's the same thing. We're tagging the data with a unique identifier that's persistent so that we can trace it throughout its lifetime. Once we do that, we have to make sure that you can access that data. And of course, we have to provide for the appropriate security and authorization authentication protocols. We want to make sure that our data can talk to each other, that is, that they're interoperable. And sometimes that's a very difficult conversation about ontologies and standards. And most importantly, we want to make sure that our data is reusable so that when I generate a data set, you can use it for your own research. You can access it, you can find it, you understand the vocabulary of it, and you can use it. That's what FAIR is. I suspect that probably we will go far long before we're fair. Because interoperability is really hard. That's the hard one. So this is an overview slide that I'm going to talk through in different pieces. But what I want to give you a sense of is that when we think about how to make data fair, we're thinking holistically. And there are a lot of different ways that we can address this issue. There's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all, because you represent researchers from all the institutes and centers, and as you know, you have different data with different needs, and so we can't give you one solution, but we have to give you reasonable solutions that you can adopt. As a first pass, NIH strongly encourages that if there is a community data repository for your data that's open access, that you do use it, and you can see the link to the BMIC website. And I'll talk a little bit about trusted data repositories in a minute. Actually, now. So just like the FAIR concepts, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, there's the concept in the community that's evolving through Core Trust Seal and Research Data Alliance. That's trusted principles for data repositories. That is to say that the repository is transparent about what services it can and it cannot offer. It's responsible to providing high quality data and data services to its users. that it focuses on its user community and its potential uses, that it thinks very carefully about sustainability for long-term data archive and preservation, and that it relies on modern technologies and infrastructures in order to support repository operations. Those are the principles of trust. Those principles will go out for an RFI fairly soon, probably through either Research Data Alliance or Core Trust Seal, and we encourage the community to give us feedback as we think further about what kinds of criteria and characteristics can we think about for open access data repositories. I just want to let you know that we will be issuing 2 funding announcements for data repositories and knowledge bases as separate programs, because data repositories, data knowledge bases are resources, and they're very important research tools. However, at NIH, they've been historically funded through research grants, primarily the R01 research grant, and that is not an optimal mechanism for a resource. Resources are unique. They provide capabilities to users. They don't necessarily focus on innovative tools and technologies. Our end goal is to make sure that researchers will have confidence in the data and information integrity. So these new funding announcements will have some elements that might be familiar to you if you're involved in the data science community international, and that is that they focus on 4 key elements. The first is scientific impact nationally and internationally, having a footprint of user and a user base that's documented for their impact. Engaging a community, not just users, but also journals, to make sure that the products that they're developing are widely used. Focusing on the quality of the data and the services, as well as efficiency of operations. And I want to note that for knowledge bases, we are going to be encouraging people to think about curating information beyond human curation, because that will not scale with the amount of data and information that we have in the future. And finally, as Vivian pointed out, thinking very carefully about the governance model of the data resource. So if there is no community repository, there are other options, and I want to point out a few of them, starting with what's happening at NCBI and PubMed. So just recently, NCBI is publishing supplemental material of associated data with publications up to 2 gigabytes. So if you have a data set that's associated with your publication, you can actually submit it to NCBI, and it will be stored and available for people to download. They will also assign unique identifiers in some cases. This is just a paper I pulled up that's of interest to me personally, but many of the articles coming out in PubMed Central are now listing right after the title the associated data links, and you can see that it's becoming more rich. And really thanks to Jim Estelle and his team at NCBI for really taking this action item on. There are other options. You might have movie data that's associated with your publication, or that you feel is important to communicate to researchers, or you might have audio files, or you might have spectroscopic data that you want to share. We are piloting a program with Figshare to make data citable, shareable, discoverable, and reusable. And this pilot will assign an institutional object identifier to each data set. We will develop domain-specific metadata templates for research data. We'll tag that data so that it can be searchable in common search algorithms like Google or Bing. We'll make sure that you can link your grant information to your data so that you get credit for the data that you're sharing. You'll be able to embargo data if you need to. You'll be able to associate a license with that data. We will be able to track the metrics of data use, and so will you. You can publish any type of data file that you feel is important for your publication, that underlies its figures or tables, or that makes your research reproducible. And this is our way of helping implement FAIR. We're going to study how this pilot is used in the community over the course of 1 to 2 years, and then we can report back to you, if you like, on how researchers are actually using FAIR to enable data sharing for their data sets. Vivian mentioned briefly about STRIDES, and she did an excellent job. I almost don't need to say anything. But as you know, STRIDES, Science and Technology Research Infrastructure for Data Experimentation Sustainability Initiative, is really a transactional agreement between 2 cloud service providers, Google and Amazon, to lower the cost barrier for you to store data on either one of those platforms and to compute on that data. There are some additional training tools and technologies that you can utilize primarily through Google, but it's really barrier reduction in cost and capabilities to use Google and Amazon cloud service providers. It doesn't provide infrastructure or assigning unique identifiers or data management. It's just a barrier reduction. So that's just the first part of how we can make data fair. Certainly we encourage you to use open access data sharing repositories if you can, but if you can't, or you have other options available, including linking it to the supplemental material in PubMed Central, exploring using Figshare through our pilot, or putting your data on strides and then working with Figshare to make sure that your data has a unique identifier and is accessible. Now I want to tell you a little bit about data policies, because having an implementation strategy is great, but strategy, implementation, and policy often go hand in hand. And so recently, we issued a community solicitation for input on our planning for NIH data management and sharing policy. We received over 189 submissions from PIs, from organizations, and from folks internationally and from industry. We identified a number of key elements for what would make a successful data management and sharing policy. One of the top elements that floated up was the fact that policy and implementation do need to go hand in hand. So we're thinking very carefully about when we develop a policy, do we have the right infrastructure available in order to make that policy implementable? We're drafting that draft policy. It will be released for community input this summer, and you will be able to weigh in on the policy. We hope to release the final policy at the end of 2019. So at the end of this winter, that policy should be released, and I think it'll become effective the following year. So you'll have a whole year to get ready for it. But I do want you to think now in your planning and your research that it's very likely that FAIR-enabled data sharing will be a prominent component of that policy. So it is going to be coming. And proposing realistic data management plans will be another component of that policy. So this is all well and good. We've made data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, but a lot of the data that NIH is investing in is not necessarily just one-off data sets, but it's in a sort of an ecosystem like the Cancer Commons framework, or the Common Fund programs, or the TopMed data, or the GTEx data. Those data sets, they don't live by themselves in isolation. They're actually part of a community of research. And so now we have to think about how will we connect our communities together? These are just a few of the high-profile data sets that are moving to the cloud, and they are not just data sets. The Mental Health Archive is an entire consortium. Gabrielle Kids First, Transformative Cryo-EM, that is actually a data set. But most of these are not. They're pretty rich. And so what we want to do as a very first step, and one would think almost this would be low-hanging fruit, is more or less what Vivian was alluding to, which is to allow you the ability to log on once and access all these resources. Just the first thing. So the end goal, again, is to provide a consistent way for you, the researcher, to log on and have access to all those different resources. What would it take? We have to have a streamlined logon for authorization control for controlled access data. We'll be making use of industry standard technologies, and the reason is because you all have invested a lot of money in your resources, and you have a whole pipeline of what's happening there, and we cannot do any harm to what you've done. So we're developing technologies that are fairly lightweight and simple, and that more or less float on top with minimal and invasive computational engineering, so that you can have the resources that you know and love, but also have access to other resources. So if you're a cancer researcher, you can log on and you'll see your cancer portal, and it'll be just what you expect, but there'll be these other resources that you can connect to as well. That's the first step, and that's not the end goal, but at least that, I think, will enable a broader array of research questions to be asked. Now I want to tell you about what we're doing to engage a broader community, because it's great that we're doing all this work at NIH, but there's an awful lot of data science that's happening in a broader community. So we're doing a few things. We're partnering particularly with the National Science Foundation, but not just the National Science Foundation, to think about ways in which we can enable data science. And one of our focal points is on artificial intelligence LC components of artificial intelligence, tools and technologies that use artificial intelligence, as well as other components of data science and training. We'll be leveraging our SBIR, STTR capabilities to bring in industry expertise in something that's called software hardening, or bringing in software integrators to really do exactly what you were discussing, which is to help academic software move to that next level. We'll be engaging a broader community of people who may not necessarily be PhD scientists to think about codeathons, citizen science, and grand challenge or challenge problems. And we'll be improving our software sustainability, utility, and efficiency. So all of these activities are starting this summer and should be in completion by November, December. Finally, I want to tell you about all the great things that we're doing to enhance our biomedical workforce. So NIH is an internal and an extramural research organization. So I'm going to tell you first about what we're doing internally to NIH, and then I'm going to tell you what we're doing externally. So this summer, we're bringing 10 undergraduate computer science fellows to NIH to work in our programs. And it's really a win-win for both of us. They're going to learn about federal service, and we're going to learn a great deal about computer science. So we're really happy to have these tech-savvy students come and work in our federal institutes and centers. We're also bringing in 13 master's level students. These students will be working in laboratories where they'll be working on hard problems with biology researchers here at NIH in our intramural program. And this is a pilot that's driven by a number of local universities, for example. In the not too distant future, we will be announcing a national service sabbatical, not too dissimilar to things that happen at NSF, where we'll bring in high-level, tech-savvy data and technology experts to work with a large amount of volume of data in our high-profile programs like All of Us, or Cancer Moonshot, or Brain or Heal. That's an area that could really use some data science. We expect 5+ fellows to start in late 2019. Thinking about training the next generation really has us thinking about how can we instantiate data science, not just with one FOA, but with all of our FOAs. So we are expanding language in our T programs to enhance expectations for computational skills at the student and postdoctoral level, so that people who are interested in a T program can apply for this in data science. We'll disseminate this language and training mechanisms across all the ICs so that every IC can actually enhance their own data science program. And we'll be launching data-focused training programs in very specific areas of high need, for example, biomedical, behavioral, and social science, and neuroscience. And I just point to the RFA here because that one was deemed as a high need right now. So I'm going to let you take that picture. We're also improving our capacity and rigor and reproducibility and responsible conduct of research and data science by providing modules in existing programs to support PIs who want to address both of these areas in data science. We're also expanding our K-25 mentored quantitative research development program to include data science. And we're developing boot camps and short training programs for a diverse cohort of research trainees, including our Strides cloud service providers and partnering with professional organizations. Google has been spearheading running boot camps for biomedical researchers, and we're going to leverage that to enhance this in a diversity training activity as well. And we'll be emphasizing quantitative and qualitative skills in existing diversity programs, and there are new language in my institute's FOAs to enhance researchers to think about bringing diversity into the data science work that they're doing. So this is the vision. It's a fair, enabled, and integrated, and hopefully very modern view of data science for NIH and across the data science collaborative sphere with NSF, with DOE, and internationally as well. So again, I just want to leave you with this thought that it is not 5 cylinders of excellence in any way. We work across NIH, and the office here that I represent today is strictly a coordinating office, and we coordinate across all of these activities. Nobody does this work alone. So these are the people who've worked on this program across NIH, and it's just been a real joy to spend my time within Deep Poughkeepsie and Jim and Vivian to really help this fast forward. And now I'm going to show you the slide that John didn't want me to show you, which is when you think about data science, it's really an ecosystem. It's composed of data that lives in data resources that have their own user communities and their own tools. And what we really want to do is to build bridges across those communities, to cross-train people, and to think very carefully about data policies. So that's the end, and I'm happy to take questions if you like. Yes. This is a little nitty-gritty, but I'm just curious, will consenting be an issue in terms of people that have consented to have their data being used in a certain way, or is that? We are working with our Office of Science Policy and our Office of Extramural Research to deal with both general research use consent and specific research consent. So we are definitely working with them. There is some issue about the lag time between requesting data and getting consent that we will need to address, but we will definitely respect the boundaries that PIs and that patients put on their data. So yes.
Going forward, they would all be advised to make sure consenting was so that it could be properly shared.
Yes, absolutely. If that's what people feel comfortable with, absolutely, and we'll respect that and make sure that that's in place.
Thank you for that presentation. It's very exciting, actually. On the sort of next generation of data science, I really appreciate the emphasis on the workforce and training grants and things. Are these going to be new funds, or are they going to be reallocated funds, or do you know that yet?
So right now, the Office's Data Science Strategy has a $30 million budget. Some of it will be partnering so that we can see data science in other NICs. Some of it will come from the ICs themselves. In the training components, it will be rebudgeting mostly within the ICs, except for a few cases where we do need to put in extra money. Yeah.
I guess I had a follow-on question from the consent one, which is this notion of the single sign-on access. What's the idea about how that will work, given that a lot of the access now is consent-driven by the different studies with different restrictions? So if I wish to go and apply for access for one study that's general research use, I have to write what I'm going to do, get that approved. But I'm reasonably flexible because it's general research use. If I want to go and sign up to, say, one of the top med cohorts, some of those may have very restrictive uses, and I'll have to make sure. So, you know, my single sign-in might give me access across these, but it doesn't really if the permissions are different. So what's the notion about how that will work? Yeah,
so you still have to get the permissions for those specific data sets, and that can be a long process, and we do know that, and we're trying to work on lowering that barrier. But you still have to get the consent of that data. This will provide the technology, which is a token technology, so that once you have gotten the consent for one system and the other system, it will be very easy for you to then get the data. But it will not lower the barrier for getting the consent. You still have to go through that laborious process.
I think there should be something like a TSA pre-approved process for investigators who show that they're responsible and can abide by the data checkboxes. Just a thought.
That's a great idea. I'm going to take that back to our senior leadership for that thought. Oh, Vivian has a comment.
One of the things we looked at was a central IRB when you're dealing with these issues, because otherwise you go insane trying to go through each individual one. So there's some discussion internally around, particularly with TopMed, what a centralised IRB would look like, and other ways that you could reduce the barrier in terms of time, but make sure that the security is correct. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. Thank you.
Other comments or suggestions as this office takes off? Again, there's a lot going on, but there is a clear foundation for the office, and that is making sure that the strategic plan gets implemented. So that's our reference. We'll hear more from what the office does, and we'll hear in January how our efforts with the Common Fund harmonization are working. So I want to thank everybody. This was a very robust and useful discussion for us today. And our next meeting is September 6th, and we'll be in the Natcher building, which is the other side of the campus, and a much more modern building. So thanks and safe travels. Close the meeting.